FlutterFlow recently released a very popular feature called Cloud Function. And this is a feature that's a lot more powerful than people give it credit for. And so in today's video, we're going to have a complete overview and tutorial on FlutterFlow's Cloud Functions. Now, before we get started, as always, all the apps and all the resources that I'm going to be building and demonstrating in today's video, you will be able to view and or clone from my Patreon page. And to learn more about our Patreon community and its benefits, check out the link in the description below. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about FlutterFlow's Cloud Functions, which I call Power Simplified. So we're going to be discussing what is a cloud function. We're going to be talking about why they're powerful and what can they offer you. We're also going to discuss the difference between cloud functions and regular functions, app flows. We're going to talk about the three types of cloud functions, creating and building cloud functions, and some final thoughts along with some tips and tricks so that you make the right decisions when it comes to building your own apps. First of all, let's talk about what a cloud function is. And I find it very helpful to use a visual diagram to explain this. So here we have a user, and this is a user that's going to be interacting with the app that you're building. So let's say we have a FlutterFlow app, and it doesn't matter what kind of app that you're building, because with FlutterFlow, you can build a web, desktop, mobile, you can build all kinds of apps, and they all behave very similarly. So your app is going to have things like logic. It's going to have, functions inside of logic that calculate various things. Maybe you're building a currency converter app and it needs to get the currencies, calculate the currencies. Regardless what kind of app you're building, you need to have some logic. And also your app is going to have some kind of a database or back. Maybe this is going to be app state or page state. Maybe this is also going to be persistent app state, or maybe you're going to be using some third-party database like Supabase. It doesn't really matter. You need a database backend. Now, in this situation here, all the logic and all the function is being executed right inside the app. So as the user is using the app, the logic is happening right in the app. So if this is a web app, then the browser is executing the function. If this is an app that's running on the user's mobile device, like a tablet or a phone, then those functions, all that logic is being executed right on the device. Well, there is another way of doing it, and that is by leveraging cloud infrastructure. And so when you think about Google Cloud, you think about AWS, you think about Azure. Well, what those companies provide is so-called cloud infrastructure. And this is essentially all the same thing that you see here, except it's being run on some computer somewhere out there. All of these things are not being run right on the person's device. They're not being run in the browser or right on the phone. Essentially, you are leveraging somebody else's farm of computers to do specific tasks. So cloud infrastructures are very expensive, and they can do a ton of things. So they can do things like functions. They also have their own databases. An example would be like Firestore, but there are many other databases that you can use out there in the cloud. And they also have a ton of other services as well. So there's many things that you can do by leveraging a cloud infrastructure. And in many situations, that can be the right choice depending on the kind of app that you're building. And so cloud functions are essentially functions. It's one piece of this puzzle that runs on a specific cloud infrastructure, whether it's from Google, Microsoft, or Amazon, or somebody else. But the cloud functions that we're talking about today run specifically on Google's infrastructure. All right, so now that you hopefully have a better understanding of what role cloud functions play and how they fit into your kind of app infrastructure, let's roll up our sleeves and let's go into FlutterFlow, and let me show you how you can create, build, and deploy these cloud functions. All right, so here I am inside of FlutterFlow, and I have created a sample app to demonstrate how these cloud functions behave. So I have a couple of pages here. Now, you also need to make sure that you configure your FlutterFlow app to a specific Firebase project. So you can simply click here, click on Firebase, enter your Firebase project, add it, And then you want to click on generate config files, because after all, cloud functions are a feature of Google Cloud, as you're going to see a little bit later in the video. And that is why you need to connect it to your Firebase project, which in turn connects it to Google Cloud. If you come over here and you click on Cloud Functions right here, you're going to be on a page that allows you to create these cloud functions. And essentially creating a cloud function is very, very simple. So you can simply click here, you give your function a name. Let's say I just call it function 0. Next, you click here, view boilerplate code. And this is going to generate the boilerplate for your cloud function. Essentially, this is the code that must always be there before you even start writing your customized logic for this function. So regardless of what kind of cloud function you're going to be deploying, you need this boilerplate. So next you want to click on copy to editor, and now you have this boilerplate code in your editor right now. And so the only thing that's left to do is to write your cloud function logic between these two lines right here. So I can simply come in and I can say something like return hello world. And once I define the return condition, the next thing I need to do is I need to specify right here that this function is going to be returning a value. So I turn this on, and because this function is returning a string and this function can potentially return just about anything, I can specify a string right here, okay? And at this point, my very, very simple function is ready to be deployed. So next thing you want to do is click save here, and once you saved it, you can now deploy it. So all we need to do is click deploy, and you will deploy it right here. Now I actually created a similar function right here. So here I have a very, very similar function, except it comes back with hello from function 1, and this function is actually called function 1. As you can see, it says function 1, and function 1 here. And I have a bunch of functions that I define that do all kinds of different things. And so here I can click here, deploy, and I can click here, and that's going to deploy this function on Google's infrastructure. So I'm going to click on deploy, and it's essentially taking all this code, packaging it, and deploying it onto the cloud. So all the code that I've defined here in this browser in FlutterFlow will run exclusively on Google's high-tech, high availability, high performance infrastructure. And now, as you can see, this function has now been deployed. And so what this means is that this function is now fully available to be executed on this Google's platform, okay? So now I can get out and I can build a UI that takes advantage of this function. And doing it is very, very easy because FlutterFlow has been able to integrate this powerful functionality in a very, very seamless way with everything else. So it's very, very easy to integrate. So here I have a page called Demo1, and here you have a button that when you click it, it's going to trigger that function on Google's infrastructure, wait for that function to execute, get back a response, and display it right here. So if we click here, I can just click here, I can open it, and all we have here is two actions here, right? We have this action and we have these actions here, right? We have like 2 rows of actions. So this thing here is a cloud function action, and you can essentially come back over here and you can search for cloud, and then you can access all these cloud functions here. And in this case, I'm just accessing this function 1 that we've just defined. And so here we can just check if it's succeeded or not. And you do the exact same thing when you're working with API calls. So if you've been doing any kind of development with FlutterFlow, you've been designing and working with API calls, then this whole UI should be very, very familiar to. It's pretty much the exact same thing, except we're no longer executing an API call inside the app. We're executing a cloud function somewhere in the cloud. Now, if the cloud function has succeeded, then this thing is going to execute. And in this case, we're simply going to update the page state with the response. Okay, so here what I'm doing is I have a page state called response, and I'm taking the response that I'm getting from the cloud function and I'm setting it to this value here, to this page state. And once we have the page state set, this thing is going to display the value. Okay. So it's a very, very simple pattern. That is kind of what you always want to do if you want things to be dynamic. And in this case, you want things to be reactive, because we do not know what the response is going to be or when the response is going to be. In order for us to display it here, right? We need to execute it, wait for it, get the response, and then rebuild the page. And that is exactly what happens here, because when you come here, we have this rebuild current page. If you set it to no rebuild, you won't be able to see the response reactively, okay? So make sure you have that set. Now, if we go ahead and run our app, you will see how this whole thing comes together. All right, so here's our app. Now, when I click this button, we're gonna execute the cloud function, grab the result, and display the result right here. Let's see if that works. Okay, so now we are running it, and there it is, hello from function 1. And if we go back here, you will see that that is exactly what the response is, hello from function 1. And so that is an example of a very, very simple cloud function and how to make it work with the UI. Let me show you a more complex example. So here I prepared another cloud function. This is function 2. And in this case, what this function is doing is it's fetching a particular URL, and this URL gives us back some random user data. So this is the kind of URL resource that you're going to be using if you need some fake user data. So if I copy this URL right here and I open it here in my browser, this is the response I'm getting. So I'm essentially getting a JSON object with a bunch of data, ID, UID, password, first name, last name, and username, etc., etc. And if I reload this, it's going to regenerate new values, okay? And so essentially what we're doing here is we are grabbing this URL here, we are parsing it from JSON, and we are extracting just the first name, and then we are returning this first name. And if I go back to the UI here, I have this demo 2 page, and essentially it's the exact same thing. But in this case, we are executing that second function, right? So here we see the flow function 2. If it succeeded, we're updating page state with the value that we've gotten from that function. And in this case is that first name that we are looking for. And so I can go to the second page right here. This is Cloud Function Demo 2. I'm going to run this. And now we are running the second cloud function. And in this case, we got Otis, which is that randomly generated first name. If I run it again, we're going to get another one. If I run it again, we're going to get another one. So essentially, we are executing this API call to this random user info service. We're getting back everything. And in this case, I'm displaying first name. Now I can also come back here, and let's say I want to display something else. I can go back to my cloud function. In this case, I have first name. And as you saw, there's lots of other things that I can display. So how about the username? Well, I can just come back here and I can just do username. I'm going to click deploy. It's out of date because I modified it, but I did not deploy it yet. So there's a mismatch with the cloud function that I'm looking at right now on my laptop that FlutterFlow knows about, and the function that has been deployed, right? They're not in sync. So I'm going to click deploy. It's going to package it up, and it's going to literally upload it to Google services, where it's going to be replicated among the many, many servers that Google has. And after that, it will be ready to accept requests from its users. All right. And now, as you can see, that function has been deployed successfully. And so what this means is that we can go back to our app here, and let's go to the second page. This is Cloud Function Demo 2. And we don't need to reload this app, okay? Because the only thing that has really changed is the cloud function, okay? So this app stays the same. The cloud function is different. So all we need to do is click on run cloud function, and we get back a username this time. So I can run it again, and we get back a username. So as you can see, we have successfully changed this cloud function from displaying the first name field of that username user JSON object to displaying the username field in this case. So obviously you can keep changing it. You can keep playing around with it. You can do a lot of things with it. Very, very flexible. But what makes it even more powerful is that there are 3 types of cloud functions that you can implement. And this is simply the first type, okay? The second type of cloud function that you can implement is an asynchronous cloud function. So this first example was a synchronous cloud function because we are executing it, we're letting it run, and then we're getting back a response, a result, and then we're doing something with the results. So in this case, we're displaying the result. But you can also create and deploy an asynchronous cloud function that can be triggered via an API URL. Then it can run some code and do something with the response that we get back from this cloud function. And in this case, I want to show you a function that I created. This is function 3 right here. And what this function is doing is it's making available an API URL that you can make available to your users. You can even create a custom API service that does pretty much anything that you want. And this wasn't even possible before FlutterFlow created this functionality. Okay, you couldn't have done it before in your FlutterFlow apps, and so now you can. And so this simple cloud function, essentially what it's doing is it's creating an API endpoint, and it's making an API endpoint available. And so if you send a hello to this API endpoint and you provide a name as part of the query string, and I'm going to show you exactly what I mean, this function is going to connect to my own Firebase Firestore, and it's going to modify a particular document that I have. Now, after you deploy this cloud function, the next thing that you want to do is you want to head over to console.cloud.google.com. This is going to be your dashboard, your console for a specific project. And you want to select the project that you're using in your Firestore, okay? So with Firestore, I'm using PRJ2, and here you want to make sure that you select the same project that you're using in your Firebase Firestore that you initially connected to your FlutterFlow app. And so if I come over here and I select this project, this is the exact same project that I'm using in my Firebase Firestore, okay? And this is the exact same project that I have connected to my FlutterFlow app in the beginning. And so if you come over here, and now that you have this project selected, what you want to do is you want to search for cloud function. You want to type that in, and you're going to have this menu option here. You want to click here, and on this page, you are going to see all the cloud functions that you have deployed. So I have a bunch of cloud functions that I have deployed here. You can ignore these two. They were done for a different project a long time ago. But what you want to be paying attention to is to these 5 cloud functions, because these are the 5 cloud functions that I created as part of this app demonstration. And the cloud function that we're talking about right now is this function 3, right? Because if I go back here, we have function 3, and we have function 3 here. And so if you come back over here, you can click on this function 3 right here, and you're going to have access to a lot of interesting information. There's a lot of things to look at, but what you want to take a look at is this trigger here. If you click this trigger right here, you're going to be presented with a trigger URL. And this is a URL here that when you access this URL, you're going to trigger your cloud function that we have in FlutterFlow right now. Now, if I click this URL, that's not going to work. It's going to say not found. And the reason it says not found is because we did not give this a hello. Okay, so this is why it says not found here. And so what we want to do is we want to give it a hello. And after that, we want to give it a parameter. So here I'm looking for a parameter called name. And so what we want to do is we want to say name, and then we want to enter a name. So let's say name Michael. And this name equals Michael is something that's called a query string. And that's a way to pass different parameters to your URL, to your API. And so inside of our cloud function, we are essentially parsing this name. We're getting this Michael. And then what I'm doing here is I'm also updating one document in my Firestore collection. So I'm going into the people collection. I'm finding this one document, and I'm updating the name field there. Okay, I'm saying name is going to be the new value. Okay, and if I go into my Firestore DB, I have this people collection, and I have this document with this ID. You see where it says FKF, and it ends with AD3. And I go back to my cloud function. You see it's FKF AD3. And right now it says name is mine. But if I run this cloud function by accessing that URL with the proper query string, name equals Michael, it's going to update this value automatically. So let me show you how that works. So we have everything set up. I'm going to run this, and then I'm going to come back here, and this should be updated to Michael. Okay, so now as you can see, it says Michael here, and that was just updated. And if you go back to the cloud function, it says here document updated successfully, which is what we have here, document updated successfully, after we locate this document and update it with the corresponding name and the value that we sent via the query string there. So this is a solid example of an asynchronous cloud function because we are not running it from inside the app. This cloud function can essentially be run by just about anyone outside, and we have no idea when that's going to happen. And we really cannot build the logic inside of FlutterFlow to handle it. It needs to be built here. And fortunately, it's very, very simple and easy to build these kinds of custom cloud functions with ChatGPT. So as you can see, I have here a conversation that I will make available to our Patreon members. That's going to show you exactly what you need to do to have these cloud functions built with ChatGPT. And it's very, very easy and it's very seamless. It's essentially one prompt and generates the whole thing. You can copy it and you can paste it in here. But overall, this is very, very simple. It's not very, very complex. And as a result, you have your own API endpoint that you can essentially do anything that you want with. You can pass it data, you can do some logic with it, you can do anything that you want. That is the power of cloud functions. You can create synchronous or asynchronous as well. The next function that I want to show you is function 4. And this is the same idea. We are also creating an asynchronous function, but at this time, we are passing a request, which is essentially a question, and then we are passing this question to ChatGPT. So I'm using the ChatGPT API here, and I am passing the question that we are getting from the URL, from the query string, and then we're sending back a response via the browser. And so once you've defined it here, you can click on deploy. As you can see, I've already deployed it. Next, you want to head to your Google Cloud Console. You want to type cloud function, find that function. In this case, this is function 4. Click on this. You want to select trigger here. And now you have a trigger right here. Now, in this case, what we are doing is we're passing a query, right? Query is that question. So we can ask ChatGPT pretty much anything via the API, and it's going to come back with a response. So I'm going to copy this URL right here, copy this link address, paste it right here, and I'm going to say query, and I can say, what is the capital of Mexico? Okay, and I also want to make sure I format it correctly so there's no spaces and special characters, and this is standard formatting. And so now we have a full request. We have function 4, we have a query, and hopefully ChatGPT is going to come back with a response. So we're going to execute this, and this is the response that we are getting. The capital of Mexico is Mexico City. We can also ask it something else. What is the capital of Argentina? Execute this, and we are getting a response. The capital of Argentina is Buenos Aires. Now, in this case, this custom function returns a response directly to the user. So we're not updating a Firestore document or adding a new field or anything like that. We are sending a response directly to the user, but you can do both if you want, or you can do one or the other. Because if you go to this cloud function here, we have also code that allows you to find a particular document, set a new field, or create a new collection, or whatever you want to do. And really, the choice is up to you. I just decided to use this format because now you have a fully functioning API endpoint, and that means you can create your own backend, you can create your own service, you can build an app that, does pretty much anything that you want. Maybe, it takes the user's input, does something with it, sends it to ChatGPT, gets a response, does something to it again, and then gives it back to the user. In this case, this is the right approach because if you're creating an API backend, you want the response to be direct. You don't want to set anything in your Firestore DB or anything like that. You just want to respond with data that the user is looking for. And so this is kind of the way to go. Now, there's also a third type of cloud function that you can leverage. And so if you head over to this cloud function 5, and here I have a very, very simple cloud function that behaves completely differently compared to the previous examples that I demonstrated. So in this case, we are not creating a synchronous cloud function. We are not creating an asynchronous cloud function. We are creating a cloud function that's going to be triggered by an event in our Firestore collection. So remember how I mentioned that cloud functions are simply one Lego piece in this cloud infrastructure. Okay, we have a lot of other things in our cloud infrastructure, and if you head over to your Google console, you have access to lots and lots of services, right? So if I type Firestore here, well, guess what? We have Firestore, we have Data Store, we have, you can type SQL and you have SQL Workspace, SQL, Alloy DB. You have so many services as part of your, Google infrastructure that are essentially under this Google project umbrella that you've created in Firebase and linked to your FlutterFlow app. And essentially, these functions here, they can interact with any of the other services that are available as part of your overarching Google project that you've set up and linked to FlutterFlow. And so if you head back here, what's happening here is that I'm creating a function called function5 here, and it's set to directly work with Firestore. And it's listening for a new document that's being created. So as you can see, it says here on create. And then when a new document is created, this whole thing is triggered. So as was the case before, this is also an asynchronous function because it does not know when it will be triggered. It's waiting for it to be triggered. And just like in the previous example where, a function was triggered via an API URL, this function is triggered via an event in Firestore. Okay, so it's also an asynchronous function. And so once a new document is created in this collection, it gets all the information, and what it's doing is it's updating the document and it's setting the city as New York. And so as you can see, I've already deployed this function. This function is already deployed. And so what this means is that we can head over to Firestore, and here we have a collection called people. And so this function is listening for create events on this specific collection. So it's not going to be triggered on any of the other collections that I have, only on this people collection. And so if we add a new document here, and you can just add, and let's say name is Rob, and I click on save, as soon as I click save, that function will be triggered. That is why it's asynchronous, because it gets triggered as a response of some external event. And after creating this document, it's going to add a new field called city, and it's going to set it to New York. So let's go ahead and try this. I've just created, there's the new document, and right now, and there you have it, city, New York. And that is because that function that we've deployed is active and it's always listening. It's very, very flexible. So you can attach to any event in your Firestore database that you want, and you can do pretty much anything that you want. So if I create a new document, it can create another document somewhere, or it can send an email, or it can, I don't know, like call you, right? Or if you update a document, it can do all kinds of events. It can execute an API, you name it. It's really a question of your specific use cases when you're building your app. So as you can see, this cloud functions functionality here is very, very powerful, because not only can you create these simple functions here and tie them to here with FlutterFlow and send data to it, parse this data, do something with this data, execute an API call, get this data back, and then make it available throughout your app. But you can also create asynchronous functions that give you an API endpoint that you can pass around, create your own backend if you want, do anything that you want. And you can also create an asynchronous function that will listen to various events that are going to be emitted by other things in your Google project. So in this case, this is Firestore. It could be just about anything, and your cloud function can respond to these events and do the appropriate thing. And so definitely a very, very powerful functionality. And I think a lot of people underestimate just how powerful cloud functions are when it comes to doing complex or even simple tasks that you need to be done inside of your app. And so next time you're building an app and you're looking to do something a little bit more complex, something that might take time, something that you're not sure will be synchronous, something that may be asynchronous, or maybe you're building some kind of a backend service and you need to provide an API to maybe another app, maybe another FlutterFlow app, or to your customers or to somebody else. Cloud functions are the perfect way to solve this problem. Now, if you guys are thinking to yourself, these cloud functions, there's something else. There's so many things that you can do with them. And I honestly didn't even realize that you can do so many interesting things, plus combined with ChatGPT, that will now write you a complete cloud function in just one prompt. You got to realize that this is something special. And indeed, cloud functions are very, very special and can be very, very powerful if done right. And so if you're someone that's beginning to realize the potential of cloud functions and how it can help you build better, faster, and just overall more robust apps, then you definitely need to join our amazing Patreon community. Because when you join our incredible and rapidly growing Patreon community, you will get access to everything that I talked about in this video, which means you're going to get access to this app, this FlutterFlow app, which means that you can easily view and or clone it, so you can take it apart. You can put it back together. You can take just the pieces that you're interested in and use them in one of the apps that you're building right now, or maybe an app that you're going to be building in the future. Plus, you also get access to my ChatGPT conversation, where I tell it exactly how to build these cloud functions. And I also make various corrections if I decide that that code that was generated is not doing the exact thing that I want. Plus, I'm also using ChatGPT to debug cloud functions, because when it comes to cloud functions in FlutterFlow, it's a little tricky to debug them. Thankfully, ChatGPT also saves the day when it comes to debugging as well. And not just that, you also get access to all the apps and all the resources having to do with pretty much every single video that I published on this channel. They're all there, they're all available for you to learn, to get value from, and just to become a much better no-code developer. They're all there on my Patreon page, waiting for you to leverage. And that's not all. When you join our amazing Patreon community, you're also going to get access to some extra content, such as Q&As, live streams, behind the scenes content, as well as my Patreon supported masterclass series, where I'm going to be doing deep dives on specific topics that the community votes on and the community has problems with. And while all of that is incredible value, beyond that, when you join our amazing Patreon community, you're going to be supporting this channel and supporting my work, and that is greatly, greatly appreciated. And so if any of that sounds like it might provide you with some value, then I definitely urge you to check out our amazing Patreon community and consider becoming a subscriber. And you can do just that via the link in the description below the video.